Well, my name is Lawson Naidoo. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, commonly known as CASAC. Well, look, in South Africa, the issue of the judiciary has been very prominent of late, partly because of a series, or what some may describe as a barrage of attacks against the judiciary in general and against specific judges in some cases. All of these criticisms are unfounded and not backed up by any evidence. And it speaks to a political attack on the independence of the judiciary, largely because the judiciary remains robustly independent in South Africa. It hands out judgments that are unpopular to politicians, to the governing party, and indeed to the government itself. And as a result of that, and as a result of them upholding the principles of justice, equality, and the Constitution itself, has made the judiciary unpopular in some political quarters. And we've therefore seen political attacks against members of the judiciary. Well, that's been the main issue. It's the political attacks that have been launched against the judiciary, it has not received the kind of support that one would expect from the other arms of the state, from the legislature and the executive itself. That should be coming to the defense of the judiciary in times of when they face such unsubstantiated attacks, making people aware that attacking the judiciary undermines democracy, it erodes respect for the rule of law, and ultimately weakens our democracy. On the other hand, where judicial officers do step out of line, they must be held accountable like any other public official. And the South African Constitution and legislation makes provision for that to happen. There have been very few allegations of corruption or maladministration by judicial officers, certainly those operating in the higher courts in South Africa, from the High Court to the Supreme Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court. There have, on the other hand, been more complaints that have been laid against magistrates for issues of bias, partiality, and even some cases of alleged corruption that are dealt with by a separate structure called the Magistrates Commission. But when it comes to the issue of financial autonomy, I think that's a very different matter altogether. So in South Africa, almost 10 years ago, we established what is called the Office of the Chief Justice, which is effectively stands there as a government department that takes responsibility for the administration of the higher courts in South Africa, takes responsibility for the administration of the courts as a whole. And that is a responsibility that has been taken away from the Department of Justice and placed in this Office of the Chief Justice under the guidance of the Chief Justice and with a staff of its own. But when it comes to financial autonomy, the budget of the Office of the Chief Justice and of the courts as a whole comes through the budget of the Department of Justice, which is approved by Parliament. And we have argued that the Office of the Chief Justice, together with various other institutions, the range of constitutional institutions supporting democracy that we have in Chapter 9 of our Constitution, that includes, amongst others, the Auditor General, the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, the Electoral Commission, and so on, should all be able to get their budgets directly from Parliament rather than going through a line function department, because that impinges on the autonomy and the independence. There have been some cuts to the budgets of the Department of Justice, which then filters through to the Office of the Chief Justice. But it hasn't been at a scale that I would say that undermines the integrity of the courts or the court processes. It perhaps does not assist in enhancing efficiency, but it's not a direct attack at undermining the courts. When we get into the realm of the criminal courts, where there are witnesses giving evidence and there's cross-examination and the like, it's very difficult to do that within a virtual environment. So the courts have been, and the lower courts in particular, the magistrates' courts and regional courts, have been sitting, observing the necessary COVID-19 safety protocols in order to ensure that there doesn't, the backlog of cases does not build up. But obviously, with the outbreaks of the various waves of the pandemic and the increased restrictions placed by government on gatherings and movement of people, it does make that difficult. So there has been an impact on the functioning of the criminal courts in particular. And what we've seen in recent times is an increasing politicization of the questioning of candidates who appear before the JSE, seeking to determine the political ideologies or persuasions of candidates for judicial office, and seeking to disqualify some candidates on the basis of their familiarity with members of particular political parties or the governing party in some cases, and to try and suggest that judicial officers, by virtue of past experience, and in South Africa, having come through the liberation struggle just a little over a quarter of a century ago, there are many judicial officers or candidates for judicial office who were active members in that liberation struggle and therefore have strong links, relationships with members in particular of the governing party. They may have shared times in the trenches together in the fight against apartheid. So it's not unusual to see those relationships. But what has been happening is we're seeing that some commissioners of the JSE seeking to suggest that those relationships belie a political partisanship on behalf of some candidates, when none of that is really evident anywhere else in their careers, or those who are already judges in their judicial pronouncements. And what happened in April of this year during the hearings for or interviews for candidates for the Constitutional Court was an all-out attack on one or two of the candidates who appeared before the JSE. And we felt that went way beyond the remit of the JSE. Questioning was unfair. It was highly politicized. And in fact, what we saw were open attacks on the integrity and on personal issues around those candidates. And we felt that needed to be halted and therefore needed to be challenged. We therefore brought a case in the High Court challenging the constitutionality of the JSE interview process, that it was not fair. And ultimately, the Judicial Service Commission agreed to settle the matter on the basis that the interviews in April be set aside, and those interviews were rerun in October this year. The same candidates appeared, ironically, before the same Judicial Service Commission. And we felt that it was a very important and a strong point to make, that the Judicial Service Commission itself must be held accountable. It must operate within the confines of the Constitution. Well, I think the most important issue here, or principle here, is that of transparency and openness. The fact that interviews for judicial officers in South Africa are open to the public, they're open to the media. We've now developed a culture where those interviews are live streamed by the JSE and by interested civil society organizations. The public has full access to them and can follow them, live and in real time. And it gives us an insight into the questioning that is being conducted and to whether it's fair or not, and as to whether the JSE is utilizing a rights or an appropriate set of criteria to determine the most suitable candidates for appointment for judicial office. Well, I think, we're very fortunate in South Africa. It's not just CASEC. There's another organization called Judges Matter, who focus exclusively on judicial independence and issues concerning the judiciary more broadly. And they follow these interviews of the Judicial Service Commission very, very closely. They themselves transcribe the interviews. They provide a live feed for those interviews. And they play an incredibly important role in enabling more and more South Africans to be aware of what is happening. So I think collaboration among civil society organizations, sharing information, is critically important to holding the judiciary to account. Look, I think, I have an optimistic view that the rule of law remains strong. it does come under attack from time to time, particularly from political role players whose short-term interests are sometimes served by seeking to undermine the rule of law, particularly people who are themselves on the wrong side of the law. And we see a lot of the attacks that come from political figures in South Africa come from those very political figures. The issue of legal certainty and the fact of the court system working effectively is a great issue when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment or even local investment into our economies.